The morning sun cast long shadows across the Tanzanian savanna when Dr. Sarah Chen received the emergency radio call that would change everything she thought she knew about maternal instinct and survival. Racing across the dusty terrain in her weathered Land Rover, the veteran wildlife conservationist could never have imagined the scene that awaited her at the remote research station. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. There, collapsed near the entrance of the wildlife sanctuary, lay a severely emaciated female cheetah, her golden coat dulled by exhaustion and her breathing labored. But this wasn't just any cheetah in distress. Somehow, against all odds and defying every law of nature, this dying mother had managed to drag herself nearly 15 miles across the unforgiving landscape, carrying something precious in her mouth. 3 tiny cubs, barely 3 weeks old, lay huddled against their mother's failing body. Their eyes had just opened, revealing the bright blue that would eventually turn to amber, and their spotted fur was still soft with the downy texture of newborns. The mother cheetah's amber eyes, though clouded with pain and exhaustion, remained fiercely alert as she positioned herself protectively around her offspring. Dr. Chen knelt slowly, her experienced hands trembling as she assessed the situation. In 23 years of wildlife conservation work across Africa, she had witnessed countless acts of animal devotion, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The female cheetah's ribs were clearly visible beneath her thinning coat, and fresh wounds along her flanks told a story of desperate struggle. Yet somehow, impossibly, she had summoned the strength for this final journey. The sanctuary staff stood in stunned silence as they realized what they were witnessing. Security cameras would later reveal the full scope of this incredible journey, but even now, seeing the aftermath, they could barely comprehend the determination it must have taken. This mother had somehow known exactly where to bring her cubs, had navigated terrain that would challenge even the most experienced trackers, all while fighting against her own body's surrender to starvation and injury. Dr. Chen noticed something extraordinary in the cheetah's behavior. Despite her critical condition, the mother's eyes never left the humans surrounding her. There was no fear, no aggression, only what could only be described as pleading. Her weakened paws gently nudged the cubs closer to the sanctuary workers, as if she understood that her time was ending, and these humans represented her baby's only hope for survival. The local Maasai guides who had worked with the research station for decades whispered among themselves in their native language. Even they, who had spent lifetimes observing the behavior of Africa's great predators, had never seen anything like this. The eldest among them, Maasai, shook his head in wonder and spoke of ancient stories passed down through generations about the sacred bond between mothers and their young, but admitted that reality had surpassed even the most powerful legends. As Dr. Chen carefully examined the cubs, she discovered they were remarkably healthy despite their ordeal. The mother had somehow managed to keep them fed and protected throughout what must have been days of travel. But how had she known to come here? The research station was relatively new, established only 5 years earlier as a rehabilitation center for injured and orphaned wildlife. More puzzling still, this particular cheetah had never been documented in their extensive database of local wildlife. The mother cheetah's breathing became more shallow as the morning progressed, but her vigilance never wavered. Every few minutes, she would lift her head with tremendous effort to check on her cubs, her rough tongue gently grooming them even as her own strength ebbed away. It was as if she was determined to pour every remaining ounce of life into caring for them until her final breath. Dr. Chen found herself asking questions that challenged everything she understood about animal cognition and instinct. How had this dying mother known that sanctuary existed? What had driven her to make such an impossible journey when every survival instinct should have told her to find shelter and conserve her remaining energy? And perhaps most remarkably, how had she managed to keep 3 helpless newborns alive during what appeared to be several days of continuous travel across one of Africa's most challenging landscapes? The answers to these questions would emerge over the following days, as Dr. Chen and her team began to piece together the remarkable chain of events that had led to this moment. They would discover a story of loss, determination, and an almost supernatural maternal instinct that defied scientific explanation. But they would also uncover something even more extraordinary. Something that would challenge the very boundaries between human and animal understanding, and ultimately touch the hearts of people around the world. What had brought this dying cheetah to their doorstep? What series of events had set this incredible journey in motion? And what would happen to the 3 tiny cubs whose survival now depended entirely on the compassion of strangers? The answers would prove more remarkable than anyone could have imagined. 6 months earlier, in the heart of the Serengeti ecosystem, a magnificent female cheetah named Kessie roamed her territory with the confidence of a supreme predator in her prime. Her sleek form moved like liquid gold across the savanna, every muscle perfectly honed by evolution for speed and precision. At 4 years old, she was at the peak of her hunting prowess, capable of reaching 70 miles per hour in pursuit of prey, her distinctive spotted coat rippling with each powerful stride. Dr. Sarah Chen first encountered Kessie during a routine wildlife monitoring expedition along the Mara River. The research team had set up their temporary camp near a watering hole known for attracting diverse wildlife, hoping to collect behavioral data for their ongoing conservation project. It was Chen's 3rd decade working in African wildlife preservation, but she still felt the familiar thrill of excitement each time she spotted one of the continent's magnificent predators in their natural habitat. Kessie approached the watering hole with the calculated caution that had kept her species alive for millennia. She paused frequently, her amber eyes scanning the surrounding acacia trees for any sign of leopards or lions that might threaten her safety. Chen watched through her binoculars, mesmerized by the cheetah's fluid movements and the almost mystical way she seemed to read the landscape around her. What happened next would establish a connection that defied conventional understanding of human-wildlife relationships. As Kessie lowered her head to drink, a young impala, startled by something in the brush, bolted directly toward the cheetah. Instead of triggering her hunting instincts, the sudden movement caused Kessie to leap sideways, directly into a concealed poacher's snare that had been set along the game trail. The wire tightened around her right rear paw with devastating efficiency. Kessie's panicked struggles only served to drive the metal deeper into her flesh, and within minutes, the proud hunter found herself trapped and bleeding, her legendary speed rendered useless by human cruelty. Her distressed calls echoed across the savanna, a sound that tore at Chen's heart and galvanized her into immediate action. Chen approached with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who understood that every gesture could mean the difference between rescue and tragedy. Speaking in the soft, measured tones she had perfected over decades of working with traumatized wildlife, she began the delicate process of gaining Kessie's trust. The cheetah's eyes, wild with fear and pain, followed Chen's every movement, but something in the human's demeanor seemed to communicate safety rather than threat. The rescue took nearly 3 hours. Chen worked methodically to dismantle the snare while her team maintained a respectful distance, knowing that too many humans could trigger fatal stress in an already traumatized animal. Throughout the ordeal, she spoke continuously to Kessie, her voice becoming a lifeline of calm in the cheetah's world of pain and confusion. Remarkably, Kessie seemed to respond to these gentle words, her breathing gradually becoming less labored, her struggles subsiding into watchful stillness. When the wire finally fell away, Kessie remained motionless for several long moments, as if unable to believe she was truly free. Chen had retreated to a safe distance, but she continued speaking, encouraging the cheetah to test her injured paw. Blood matted the fur around the wound, but Chen's experienced eye confirmed that no permanent damage had been done to bones or tendons. With careful movements, Kessie rose to her feet, favoring the injured limb but clearly capable of mobility. Before disappearing into the tall grass, Kessie did something that would remain etched in Chen's memory forever. She turned back toward the research team and stood perfectly still for nearly a full minute, her amber gaze fixed directly on Chen. There was no fear in those eyes now, only what Chen could only interpret as acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude. Then, with a grace that seemed impossible given her recent ordeal, Kessie melted into the landscape and vanished. Over the following months, Chen's team documented Kessie's remarkable recovery. Trail cameras captured images of the cheetah hunting successfully, her injured paw healing cleanly without infection. More surprisingly, Kessie seemed to have developed an unusual tolerance for the research team's presence. While she maintained appropriate wild distance from humans, she no longer fled immediately when she detected their scent or heard their vehicles in the distance. The research station began receiving reports from local Maasai herders about a distinctive female cheetah who had been seen in the area more frequently than usual. Unlike other cheetahs, who typically avoided human settlements, This one seemed curious about human activity, though she never posed any threat to livestock or people. The herders spoke respectfully of her, recognizing her as the same cheetah that had been rescued from the poacher's snare. Chen established a detailed monitoring protocol for Cassie, documenting her territorial patterns, hunting success, and behavioral adaptations. The cheetah had claimed a territory encompassing nearly 50 square miles of prime savanna, an area rich in prey and water sources. Everything suggested that Casey was not just surviving but thriving, her encounter with human compassion having somehow enhanced rather than diminished her wild instincts. Little did Chen know that this foundation of trust and mutual understanding would soon be tested in ways that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the bonds between humans and the natural world. The rainy season brought unexpected changes to Casey's territory. After establishing herself as the dominant predator in her range, she encountered a magnificent male cheetah named Django during the peak mating season. His territory bordered hers along the eastern ridgeline, and their courtship followed the ancient dance of their species. For 3 days they hunted together, their combined prowess making them formidable partners in the endless struggle for survival. When Django eventually moved on to continue his solitary existence, Casey was left with the precious burden of new life growing within her. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the dry season, and she instinctively sought out the perfect denning site. She chose a secluded rocky outcropping 5 miles from the research station, hidden beneath a canopy of fever trees that provided both shade and camouflage from aerial predators. On a moonless night in March, Casey gave birth to 4 cubs in the safety of her carefully chosen sanctuary. 3 healthy males and 1 smaller female emerged into the world, their eyes sealed shut, completely dependent on their mother's protection and nourishment. Casey's maternal instincts proved as sharp as her hunting skills, and she devoted herself entirely to nurturing her offspring through their most vulnerable weeks. The cubs thrived under Casey's attentive care. She rarely left them for more than an hour at a time, venturing out only when hunger forced her to hunt. Her success rate during this period was remarkable, a testament to both her desperation and her exceptional abilities. The smallest cub, the female she instinctively knew was the most fragile, received extra attention and the choicest portions of her kills. Dr. Chen's team, unaware of Casey's new family, continued their routine monitoring of the area. Trail cameras occasionally captured glimpses of the cheetah, but her movements had become more secretive, more purposeful. Chen noted the behavioral changes in her field reports, theorizing that Casey might be preparing for the mating season, unaware that motherhood had already transformed the cheetah's priorities entirely. The crisis began during the cub's 7th week of life, when unusual activity started appearing throughout Casey's territory. A new mining consortium had obtained permits to explore mineral deposits in the region, despite protests from conservation groups. Heavy machinery arrived first, followed by survey teams that crisscrossed the savanna with seismic equipment, disrupting wildlife patterns that had remained stable for generations. The noise alone was devastating to Casey's hunting success. Prey animals fled the constant rumbling of diesel engines and the sharp reports of seismic charges. What had been abundant hunting grounds became barren stretches, where even the hardiest antelope refused to venture. Casey found herself traveling farther and farther from her cubs, spending entire days searching for prey in areas she had never explored. Worse than the noise was the human presence that accompanied the mining surveys. Workers established temporary camps throughout the territory, and with them came the inevitable followers, opportunistic poachers who used the industrial chaos as cover for their illegal activities. Snares appeared along game trails that had been safe for decades. The delicate balance that had allowed Casey and her cubs to flourish was shattered in a matter of weeks. The breaking point came when Casey returned from a particularly unsuccessful hunt to find strangers near her den. 3 poachers had discovered the rocky outcropping and were methodically searching for valuable wildlife. They hadn't yet found the cubs' hiding place, but they were close enough that Casey could hear their voices discussing the fresh scent trails they had detected. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. That night, Casey made the most difficult decision of her life. She moved her cubs, carrying them one by one to a temporary refuge 2 miles away. The journey exhausted both mother and babies, but the alternative was unthinkable. The new location offered basic shelter but lacked the security and strategic advantages of her original den site. The relocation marked the beginning of a desperate spiral. Without a permanent base, Kizzy struggled to maintain the consistent hunting schedule her cubs required. She was forced to leave them for longer periods, hidden in makeshift shelters that offered little protection from the elements or predators. The smallest cub, already the most vulnerable, began showing signs of malnutrition despite Kizzy's efforts to provide for her children. As the mining activities intensified, so did the poaching pressure. Kizzy encountered snares with increasing frequency, her previous experience making her hypervigilant but also constantly stressed. The territory that had once provided abundant resources became a maze of dangers, forcing her to venture into unfamiliar areas where she was less effective as a hunter. The final catastrophe struck during the cub's 11th week. Kizzy had been tracking a small herd of Thompson's gazelles when she stumbled into an ambush. The poachers had been following her movements, recognizing her value as an adult breeding female. The tranquilizer dart struck her shoulder as she attempted to flee, but years of wariness had made her reaction time exceptional. She managed to escape before the drug took full effect, but not before sustaining additional injuries from thorns and rocks during her panicked flight through dense brush. When Kizzy finally returned to her cubs, the tranquilizer's effects were wearing off, but her body was failing. The combination of malnutrition, stress, and her recent injuries had pushed her beyond her physical limits. Yet, as she looked at her 3 surviving cubs, the smallest having succumbed to weakness during her absence, she knew she had one final journey to make. Kizzy's maternal instincts overrode every survival mechanism evolution had programmed into her species. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, she remembered something that defied logical explanation. Deep in her consciousness lay the memory of gentle hands, a soothing voice, and most importantly, the scent of safety. The research station where Dr. Chen worked had become associated with rescue, with humans who helped rather than harmed. Gathering her 3 remaining cubs close to her body, Kizzy began what would become one of the most extraordinary journeys ever documented in wildlife behavior. Using the last reserves of her strength, she picked up the first cub by the scruff of its neck and began the arduous trek across terrain that would challenge even a healthy cheetah. Every few hundred meters, she would set the cub down, return for the second, then the third, moving them in relay fashion toward her distant goal. The journey took 3 days and 2 nights. Satellite imagery would later show the zigzagging paths she took, avoiding mining camps and human settlements, while somehow maintaining an unwavering direction toward the research station. During the scorching afternoon heat, she sheltered her cubs beneath acacia trees, using her own body to shield them from the sun despite her rising fever. At night, she pressed them against her diminishing warmth, sharing what little body heat she could spare. On the second day, weakness forced her to abandon the relay method. Instead, she began carrying 1 cub at a time for longer distances before returning for the others. Security footage from a remote camera trap captured an image that would later become iconic. Kizzy struggling across a dried riverbed, a tiny spotted form dangling from her mouth, her own legs trembling with the effort of each step. Hunchman. The mathematical impossibility of her navigation became clear when researchers later reconstructed her route. Kizzy had traveled nearly 15 miles across unfamiliar territory, somehow compensating for terrain obstacles and human activity while maintaining an almost supernatural sense of direction. She had crossed 2 paved roads during pre-dawn hours, avoiding vehicle traffic that could have been fatal to her cubs. By the 3rd morning, Kizzy's body was shutting down. Her milk had dried up completely, leaving the cubs weak and crying constantly, yet somehow, she continued moving. Local Maasai herders reported seeing a cheetah moving strangely slowly across the grasslands, but none approached close enough to understand what they were witnessing. When Kizzy finally collapsed at the research station entrance, exactly as Dr. Chen found her, she had succeeded in the impossible. 3 cubs still lived, and she had delivered them to the one place on Earth where she somehow knew they would find salvation. Her amber eyes, though clouded with approaching death, held a clarity that stunned everyone present. This was not random animal behavior. This was purposeful, intelligent action driven by a mother's love. Dr. Chen immediately mobilized her entire team, while veterinarian Dr. James Okoye worked frantically to stabilize Kizzy. Chen and her staff prepared an emergency nursery for the cubs. The cheetah cubs, barely 12 weeks old, were severely dehydrated but otherwise healthy. Their mother had somehow managed to keep them alive through an ordeal that should have killed them all. Casey lived for 6 more hours after reaching the sanctuary. During that time, she never stopped watching her cubs, even as IV fluids and medication battled to keep her conscious. Dr. Chen sat beside her throughout those final hours, speaking in the same gentle tones she had used during their first encounter. Incredibly, Casey's breathing seemed to calm when Chen spoke, suggesting she remembered and found comfort in that familiar voice. In her final moments, Casey performed one last act that left everyone present in tears. Summoning strength that seemed to come from pure maternal will, she lifted her head and gently nuzzled each of her cubs in turn. It was a farewell that transcended species, a moment of pure love that connected every human witness to the universal power of a mother's devotion. The cubs' survival became a round-the-clock mission for the research team. Hand-feeding every 2 hours, constant temperature monitoring, and careful socialization to ensure they retained their wild instincts while accepting human care. Dr. Chen named them Tumaini, Nguvu, and Upendo, hope, strength, and love in Swahili, honoring both their mother's sacrifice and their own remarkable resilience. As the cubs grew stronger, their personalities emerged. Tumaini, the largest, showed his mother's fearlessness and curiosity. Nguvu displayed exceptional intelligence, quickly learning the routines of sanctuary life. Upendo, the smallest and the one Casey had worried about most, proved to be the most affectionate, often seeking comfort from her human caregivers during thunderstorms. The story of Casey's journey spread across social media platforms worldwide. Videos of the cubs playing in their specially designed habitat attracted millions of views. But more importantly, they sparked a global conversation about wildlife conservation. Donations poured in from every continent, enabling the research station to expand its facilities and increase protection for the surrounding ecosystem. The mining consortium, facing international pressure and negative publicity, voluntarily withdrew from the region. The land that had nearly cost Casey her life was designated as a protected conservation area, ensuring that future generations of cheetahs would have safe habitat. Casey's sacrifice had not only saved her cubs, but had inadvertently protected thousands of acres of critical wildlife habitat. 18 months later, Dr. Chen stood at the edge of a specially constructed release enclosure, watching 3 magnificent young cheetahs prepare for their return to the wild. They had been trained to hunt, to avoid human contact, and to survive in their natural environment. Most importantly, they carried within them the genetic legacy of a mother who had redefined what was possible when love encounters impossible odds. As the enclosure gates opened and Tumaini, Nguvu, and Upendo bounded into the savanna where their mother once roamed, Dr. Chen reflected on how one dying cheetah's desperate journey had changed not just 3 young lives, but had touched the hearts of millions of people worldwide. Casey's story proved that the bonds between mothers and children, the power of sacrifice, and the capacity for hope transcend all barriers, even those between species. This incredible true story reminds us that every day across our planet, similar acts of courage and love are taking place. Wildlife heroes, both animal and human, are fighting to preserve the natural world for future generations. If Casey's journey moved you, consider subscribing to our channel for more inspiring stories from the wild. Hit that notification bell to never miss these incredible tales of survival, hope, and the unbreakable bonds that connect all living beings. Together, we can ensure that stories like Casey's continue to be told, and that the wild places where such miracles happen remain protected forever. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.